When you want entertainment, Big 12 football delivers.
Are you kidding me?
The conference had it all in 2025. Big plays,
Outrageous.
close games, even the first-time champion.
Let the party begin here at AT&T Stadium.
Now we turn the page to new matchups and renewed expectations. The 2026 Big 12 football schedule is here, and we break it all down next on Inside the 12. The 2026 Big 12 season ready to get underway. Welcome inside the studios. Mike Leslie alongside our quarterback, Taylor McHargue. The Big 12 playing some of the best football in the country year after year, and we begin the countdown today to the 2026 season.
Already back, just wrapped up the college football season. Back here to break down 16 teams, some international matchups, some rivalry games. It's going to be fantastic. Already looking forward to August. We'll get into it right now.
Over the course of the next hour, we will break down the 16 schedules from all across the Big 12, and we will go in alphabetical order. Let's get right into it with the Arizona Wildcats. 9-4 a year ago in the second year of Brent Brennan. They've got things pointed in the right direction, and they have the quarterback.
This was one of the surprise teams, not just in the Big 12, but in all of college football a year ago. I'd put them right alongside Houston. And you mentioned having their quarterback Noah Fafita already announced that he's returning for his senior year. That is huge. I think one of the things for Arizona they need to take the next step is winning on the road. That was one of the only areas that they struggled a year ago. But there are opportunities right out of the gate to establish themselves this season. None more important than that second game at BYU. I think if they could figure out a way to get that win early in the season on the road, that sets them up for success the rest of the way to challenge in this conference. And then once you get into the meat of the schedule, I actually think the middle portion of the schedule in the Big 12 conference is maybe where they have the opportunity to really create some momentum.
You mentioned the game against BYU, obviously a huge game with two teams that figure to be at the top of the conference this season. When you get deeper into the schedule than that, though, certainly the game against Arizona State, everybody's going to be focused on the rivalry matchup. I think before that, though, their game against Cincinnati, that was a big litmus test game for both teams this past season and should be a big game again this year, that October 3rd game against the Bearcats, to see where those two teams are going to slide in the conference.
There's no doubt. And then you look at where the schedule falls in the month of November, and that's where a lot of these real challenges come from. Utah, Kansas State, Arizona State to close out the season. That road game in Manhattan, Kansas, I think we all expect Kansas State to be better next year than they were in 2025. I think, again, going back to that first part of the season for Arizona, there's an opportunity if they could figure out a way to get that win over BYU, get those wins where we think maybe the softer spot of the schedule in the middle part of the schedule, that sets them up for success in the back end in November when that schedule starts to get more challenging.
I know you're a big fan of Noah Fafita. I am as well. He's got a new wide receiver core this year. They've got a couple of transfers coming in, four-star kid out of Northern California and R.J. Mosley. They need to rebuild that piece of it, but when you've got Noah Fafita, that bodes well for their ability to figure that out.
He cleaned up the turnovers in 2025. 2024 almost led the conference in turnovers. It did a much better job in 2025 of protecting the football. That's going to be a big part of his success moving forward, continuing to protect the football at the quarterback spot.
All right, next up, Arizona State, their rival 8-5 a year ago. There's a lot of good about what Kenny Dillingham is building with that program. Obviously, the year prior, winning the conference, going to the college football playoff. A slight backtrack a year ago, going 8-5, but still high expectations for this program going forward. And you see on their schedule, certainly the big one in London as the Big 12 continues to build out their international schedule. And a litmus test game on the big picture for the national scope and the interpretation of where teams are going to slot in the college football playoff structure when they play Texas A&M in their second game of the season.
I think that part that you mentioned in September is where, for Arizona State, there's going to be so much that's new next season for the Sun Devils. That middle portion in September, Texas A&M on the road, and then going to London and playing Kansas. There's your make or break, I think, in just those 2 weeks. You go back a year ago to Kansas State, going on the road, losing in Ireland, and it felt like it took them half of the season to figure out how to sort of gain momentum again. I think the first part of the season for Arizona State, those 2 weeks in September are going to be critical, because if they could figure out a way, even if you lose on the road at Kyle Field against Texas A&M, if you win in London, you come back home, then you have a bye week, you feel really good about yourselves. If you go 0-2 in that stretch, I think that's where it sets up. It's going to be really important for Arizona State.
At Texas Tech on October 17th, obviously another big game on the schedule for Arizona State because Texas Tech looks like they will again be the top team in the conference, at least as we look at things here in January. Where do you expect Kenny Dillingham and his team to be able to take a step forward this year?
If there's one thing that I think we've learned with Kenny Dillingham is that he has his guys ready to play and play at a high level week in and week out. And I think that will bode well for, there's going to be, again, so much new for Arizona State. It'll start obviously at the quarterback spot. But I have a lot of faith, and I think a lot of other people do, in Kenny Dillingham to be able to reload. Again, September is going to be incredibly important because of how much youth is going to be on this team next year.
They play Baylor on October the 3rd. That's the team we'll take a look at next year. The Baylor Bears coming off of a 5-7 season. One more bite at the apple for Dave Aranda to get things turned back in the direction that he wants them to be, the way that Baylor certainly wants them to be. They start things off with a big date against Auburn in Atlanta in the non-conference. That'll be an interesting test. And then they have a game on October 3rd that we just mentioned against Arizona State that could be an opportunity for them because beyond Auburn, a chance to start fast. Prairie View A&M, Louisiana Tech, a game at home against Colorado. Could they be 3-1, 4-0 at that point before they go play one of the top teams in the conference on the road?
You mentioned it with Dave Aranda. There were a lot of questions on whether or not he would be back for the 2026 season. New athletic director comes in. They talked early about this is a make or break season for this football program, and they've got to get back to their expectations of competing for this league, not just getting to bowl eligibility. Auburn a year ago, challenge was not being able to stop the run and then turnovers. I think for Baylor, that's going to continue to be important next season. And on this schedule, they start out the season obviously with Auburn. That'll be challenging. But then September, out of conference, they don't have a ton of true road games until you get into the later part of the schedule and into November. So I think there's a large portion of the season for Baylor in that back half of September and most of October where I think there's some wins on the schedule that they have got to capitalize on.
Yeah, because it does get incredibly difficult at BYU, Texas Tech, and at Houston those final 3 weeks of the season. Wherever they are at that point, that could very reasonably be 3 losses. That's how tough they finish the season. It will all, it seems, come down to what happens at the quarterback position as they try and figure that out here in the offseason because they have the opportunity, perhaps, to really get that pointed in a very good direction. Next up, a team that played in Arlington a year ago. BYU made it to the conference championship game just on the outside looking in of the college football playoff. A lot of people feel like they should have been part of that CFP field. This is a team that brings back a ton of talent, and their schedule sets them up with opportunity. Let's see what the Cougars are dealing with Kalani Sitake in year number 11. Again, 8-1 in the conference a year ago. Another big game relative to the national conversation. Week 7 against Notre Dame at home. That game could do an awful lot to tilt the balance in terms of their opportunity to be in the CFP.
I think BYU, going all the way forward to the preseason rankings, if I had to make a decision today, I would have BYU ranked at the top of the Big 12, just with the amount of production they have coming back, led by their quarterback, Bear Bachmeier. I think the schedule sets up really well in the first half of the schedule. Only 2 true road games in the first part, Colorado State being one of them, who they'll be a heavy favorite over, and then at TCU. And then you mentioned getting Notre Dame to come in the middle of the season. It's more challenging, obviously, when you're playing them right out of the gate in week 0 or week 1. But in the middle of the season, after you've got your legs underneath you and having Notre Dame come to Provo, always a difficult place to play. I think the schedule sets up nicely for BYU. Like you mentioned, they've got a lot of returning production, starting with Bear Bachmeier. This is one of, I think, will be the favorites and is my favorite team right now, all the way back in January. But saying this now, I think BYU's got as good a shot as anybody to get back to the Big 12 championship and ultimately win the Big 12.
They lost their defensive coordinator, Jay Hill, but just about everybody else is back. Kelly Poppinga, who will now be their defensive coordinator, went on BYU TV recently and talked about the player-led effort. They're bringing everybody back. Offensive Player of the Year, LJ Martin is back. A ton of guys on the defensive side of the ball. They are fired up about who they have back, and there's good reason for people to believe that they could very well be at the top of the conference in 2026. We are just getting started with your first look at the 2026 Big 12 football schedule. When we return, the University of Colorado. Can Coach Prime get the Buffs pointed back in the right direction? We'll talk about Houston as well, one of the surprises a year ago. Can the Cougs, with Connor Wigman, keep it rolling?
The Big 12 football schedule is here, and it leads to the 2026 Big 12 Football Championship, making the move this year to Friday, December 4th. prime time from AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas. It will then begin alternating between Friday and Saturday each year.
We welcome you back to Inside the 12. Mike Leslie Taylor McHargue, your first look at the 2026 Big 12 football schedule, and we roll right along into UCF. The Knights in year number 2 under Scott Frost as he gets back to Orlando. Let's take a look at the schedule for the Knights this season. At Pittsburgh, their first non-conference game, their big non-conference game on the 12th of September, and then of course the game against Houston. That game against Houston, a team that had a really good season a year ago that we're going to talk about here in a couple of minutes, should be a good test for Scott Frost's team as they begin their journey under Alonzo Barnett, the transfer from JMU.
October 3rd and October 10th at Houston, at Oklahoma State. That to me is the pivotal part of the schedule for UCF, because I actually think this is one of the few teams in the Big 12 where the month of November it actually lightens up a little bit. I think that may be the not easier part of the schedule, but maybe a little less challenging. But for UCF, 0-5 last year on the road. And so you have those two key in-league games in, again, October 3rd, October 10th. They need to pick off one of those games, because I think if you do that, you create a little bit of momentum. You get into the month of October where they, last part of October and first part of November where they're largely at home. I think that's going to be the pivotal part of the season, again, for a UCF team that really struggled a year ago on the road, winless on the road in 2025.
And this is a team that at the back end of the schedule may be fighting for bowl eligibility. That stretch in November at Kansas, couple of home games, Arizona State and Iowa State, maybe an opportunity for them to pick a couple off and get themselves to the postseason.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And again, a team that a lot of this is going to hinge on, at some point, you got to start winning these games on the road. And those are two opportunities in the middle of October where they have a 5-game stretch. After that, we're largely at home. I think it's really going to come down to that pivotal part in the month of October and taking that next step to not just get to bowl eligibility, but this is a team in UCF that they have aspirations of competing for this league. Got to be able to win on the road in the Big 12 in order to do that. They're
excited about the transfer quarterback from JMU, Alonzo Barnett. Obviously had a ton of success with the Dukes a year ago, taking them to the college football playoff. He's a kid that is an extreme competitor. They're fired up about this kid. Maybe he can help turn the tide there in Orlando. Next up, the Cincinnati Bearcats, 7-6 in 2025, came out of the gates on fire. 7-1. They were in the competition for a Big 12 championship for a while. Brendan Sorsby having a terrific year through that point. He's gone. Things change. Cincinnati's schedule for this season, a challenging one. There's a lot to look at here for Scott Satterfield's team. What's the game that jumps off the page for you?
Obviously, the at Arizona and then home against Texas Tech. Those stand out. BC at home early in non-conference. What stands out most to me, though, about Cincinnati is it sets up very similar to how it laid out a year ago. They've only got one true road game all the way until October 17th when they go to West Virginia, and that one road game being at Arizona. And then the schedule gets really challenging. 3 out of their last 4 at Houston, at Iowa State, and at BYU in the month of November. For Cincinnati, there's going to be a lot that's new next season, like you mentioned. This is another team, and for so many of these teams this is the case, but especially for Cincinnati, the way that their schedule lays out, they've got to get wins early. When you only have one true road game between week 1 all the way until October 17th, you better stack up your wins early, and then you've got that 3 out of 4 in November. Man, if you haven't built your confidence by that point, that's where these teams, it starts getting really challenging in the month of November, which is exactly what happened a year ago. Because like you mentioned, we were talking about this Cincinnati team as a potential playoff team and then lose almost everything in the month of November and lose their bowl game as well.
Yeah, it's hard to talk about momentum when you lose the final 5 games of the season, but they have an opportunity to build it on the front end. Their non-conference schedule, not terribly difficult. They start their conference schedule with some of their perhaps lighter games on the schedule. Certainly, Kansas State and at Arizona is not exactly an easy way to start, but they have their bye week early on at the very least to allow them to get healthy for the really difficult stretch you're talking about late October and into November. We'll see what Scott Satterfield and his team can do in year number 4. Next up, let's talk about the Colorado Buffaloes. Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, year number 4. It's hard to believe we're already in year 4 for Deion Sanders. That has gone very fast. 3-9 a year ago, certainly a down year for the program off of a 9-4 campaign the year prior, trying to get back to that 2024 plateau. Let's get a look at the schedule for the Buffaloes. At Georgia Tech, right out of the gates in week 1 on the road. Certainly a tough test against a Tech team that was in the conversation for a playoff spot down the stretch in November. Weber State and Northwestern, their other 2 non-conference games, They start at Baylor on the road, and that's going to be a real tough test just because they were 0-5 on the road a year ago. There's a lot that Colorado's got to get turned in the right direction, and it starts with starting to win road games.
And it's great that it looks like Julian Lewis will be back and should be the guy, and that's the positive for Colorado. The negative, I think this is the most difficult first half of the schedule in the Big 12 next season. When you look at Georgia Tech, at Northwestern, at Baylor, and then, oh, by the way, you get to host Texas Tech. That is a really challenging first part of the schedule. And so for CU, it's going to be important. Can you split those? Can you pick off? You're going to have to figure out a way to create an upset or two in that mix. Otherwise, you get into the back half of the schedule, and now, just like it was a year ago, you're trying to make sure that you're maintaining your guys, that guys aren't jumping in the portal early, and that you're getting to bowl eligibility. And getting back to what Coach Prime has talked about, having that standard at CU. Last year, 3-9, that was not the expectation. But for Colorado, I do think this is, if it's not the most difficult schedule in the Big 12 this year, it's certainly in the top 2 or 3, and a lot of that is front-loaded in that first part of the schedule.
Yeah, it's a difficult spot right now for Deion Sanders and his program because it is such a hard schedule. What do you think needs to be the focus? You mentioned Julian Lewis being back. They're excited about the transfer from Sacramento State, Ernest Campbell, the wide receiver, FCS All-American. They've got talent, but they need to figure something out with this schedule because it's going to be week after week a meat grinder for them.
Offensive line play has to be better than it was a year ago, and I think you'll see that become even more important in this first half of the schedule because these teams that they're playing early, physicality is going to be a big part of that. I think at Northwestern's one that's a game Colorado should be able to win. If they could pick that up, that helps tremendously with momentum. Next up,
a Houston team that had a tremendous season in 2025. Really one of the surprises, I think, of the Big 12, 10-3 in year number 3 under Willie Fritz. This is a program that has things pointed in the right direction. Connor Wegman is back for 2026. Let's get a look at the Cougars schedule because they are looking to build upon what they did a season ago. At Texas Tech right out of the gates in the conference schedule on September the 19th. A very tough test for Willie Fritz and his team, but I think they feel like they are ready for that type of test.
Having Wegman back is big, and one thing that we talked about a lot during the season is this defense continued to get better as the year went along. And I know they lost some key pieces, but Willie Fritz, I think we've already seen some of the portal activity. I think most of us expect that Houston will reload on the defensive side of the ball, and then can Connor Wegman continue to improve and take even the next step? He was so good for them this season, and a lot of it was just his efficiency and decision-making. Can they take that next step on the offensive side and be more explosive? But for Houston, in terms of their schedule, it is manageable. I think there's a number of games. There are a couple really tough road tests, obviously at Utah being one of them. But this is a team in Houston. This was another one. We just talked about it with Cincinnati. We were talking about Houston as a potential Big 12 championship title contender early part of November a year ago. I think they've got a chance to be right there again next season. This is a manageable schedule for the Cougars, and again, with as much production as they have coming back, I would not doubt at all Houston and Willie Fritz next season.
Late bye week coming on Halloween, week 9. So that's something that's sometimes tough to navigate when you get into the injury issues that teams can sometimes have. Their defense loses 5 of their top 7 tacklers from a year ago. Their defense was terrific last season. I do think with just the leadership of Willie Fritz, they'll be able to rebuild that and get that pointed back, but that's a challenge when you lose that much talent on that side of the ball.
There's no doubt, but even going back 2 years ago to 2024 when they were 4-8, Houston's defense was not the problem. And Willie Fritz, historically, going all the way back to his time at Tulane, led by defense. Offense, take care of the football, and then just make sure that you don't put yourself in a bind. I expect Houston, they'll reload. I expect defense to still be strong under Willie Fritz.
All right, plenty more to come on Inside the 12's first look at the 2026 Big 12 football schedule. Iowa State, Oklahoma State, still to come. Can the Cyclones get it rolling again? And year number 1 for a new regime for the Pokes. What will Eric Morris bring to Stillwater? It's a season of change for the couple of programs that we're going to talk about here during this segment 3 of the 4 anyway. And we start with the Iowa State Cyclones, year number 1 under new head coach Jimmy Rogers taking over for Matt Campbell. Let's get a look at what he's going to have to deal with here in 2026. Cyhawk in week 2, their big game in the non-conference, but they certainly in year number 1, Taylor, need to win certainly the games against Southeast Missouri State and Bowling Green to get things rolling in a positive direction, get the vibes up for Jimmy Rogers.
Yeah, obviously at Iowa and at BYU stands out as challenges early, but for Iowa State, like you mentioned, there's going to be so much new for the Cyclones in 2026. The majority of the offensive skill position players are now in Happy Valley with Penn State. And for Iowa State, between Jalen Rayner and Zane Flores, the 2 transfer quarterbacks that have come in, I think the first part of the season in the month of September, and you mentioned the non-conference games, Southeast Missouri State, Iowa, and then Bowling Green. Iowa State needs to figure out who their guy is during that stretch, because if you can gain some confidence in who your quarterback is, there's one thing we saw from Jimmy Rogers a year ago at Washington State. Think back to when that Washington State team went to Ole Miss and took them to the brink. And that was a much better Washington State team than I think a lot of people realized. Iowa State, I think, has that capability, but there's going to be so much new for this team. So a lot of it's going to come down to, can they solidify the quarterback spot?
It helps that they have them at home, but on September 26th, game 1 in the conference against a very good Utah team. Welcome to the Big 12, Jimmy Rogers. Next up, the Kansas Jayhawks, year number 6 for Lance Leipold, trying to bounce back off of back-to-back 5-7 seasons. Let's get a look at what the Jayhawks schedule will look like in 2026. They are going to London to play Arizona State as the Big 12 continues to build out the international schedule. September 19th in London against Arizona State. That'll be an interesting trip for both of these programs as they get a chance to experience England.
The London game, there's no doubt, is an opportunity for Kansas you'll have the eyes of the world really on the sport and playing at Wembley. But it's also important because if you think back to Kansas State and Iowa State a year ago, Kansas State loses that game in Dublin, and it took them almost 6 weeks to get their legs back underneath them. This is a big spot for Kansas. They have Missouri earlier in the season, and then you have a road trip at Utah coming up as well. So the schedule's not getting easier for Kansas, and this is a program that it's been very clear they want to take that next step and move beyond these 5-7 seasons, not just get back to bowl eligibility, but they're trying to get back up into the upper echelon of the conference. And the way that they're spending in NIL, the commitment in facilities in Lawrence, this is a big season for Lance Leipold to take that next step for the Jayhawks.
Jalen Daniels graduates, and they need to figure out the quarterback as well. That's a big part of this offseason for Lance Leipold. Let's move to Kansas State now. The Wildcats in year number 1 under Colin Klein, another team with a brand new head coach taking over for Chris Kleiman. Klein coming over from Texas A&M, was the offensive coordinator there, but he is a Wildcat first and foremost. Let's get a look at what his schedule will be in his first year at the helm. Difficult schedule in a couple of different key spots. The game against Houston week 6 on October the 10th certainly stands out. The non-conference schedule looks gettable, maybe an opportunity to build some momentum early on in the season.
And another schedule in the Big 12 that's really a story of the first half and second half. For Kansas State, just one true road game until October 24th. So for Kansas State and the Wildcats, there are a lot of wins early in the season. Cincinnati on the road, that's their only road game until you get all the way to week 8. Then once you get into that back half of October and all of November, they spend a lot of time on the road. I think that benefits, obviously, any new head coach and a new regime trying to build your culture, some opportunities early, Nichols and Washington State at home. But I think that, again, September is going to be incredibly important for Kansas State, capitalizing on wins, because those road trips and some of the more difficult games happen in the back half of the schedule for Kansas State.
It's a meat grinder at the back end. On the road against Arizona State, on the road against Colorado, TCU, Iowa State, all road games on the back half of the schedule. But they do have Avery Johnson back as QB1, and that helps to solve a lot of problems for you. That kid can play.
No doubt, and maintaining a little bit of culture that's been passed over. And you mentioned it with Colin Klein. This is not somebody that's new to the culture and to the program. He bleeds purple and silver. And so for Colin Klein and Kansas State, I think it helps tremendously, like you mentioned, that Avery Johnson's coming back and that they spend the majority of the first part of the schedule in Manhattan.
It is a complete reboot for Oklahoma State, but they bring in one of the hottest names in the coaching ranks in Eric Morris, who turned UNT into a college football playoff contender a season ago in the American Conference. Eric Morris in year 1 in Stillwater, dealing with this schedule for 2026. At Tulsa, Oregon, and Murray State, their non-conference games. Certainly the Oregon game, a difficult, very difficult non-conference game that they will have at home there in Stillwater. And then they get into the Big 12 12 with their game at West Virginia before a relatively early bye week.
And huge for Eric Morris that he brought Drew Mestemaker with him. I think that was one of the top 2 or 3 quarterbacks in the portal. He was being sought after by a number of the top P4 programs that were trying to go get a quarterback. So to bring your guy with you to Stillwater, I thought was massive. I think there's a chance, Oregon notwithstanding, there really is a chance that you could see Oklahoma State pick up a number of wins in the first part of the schedule. We just talked about this a minute ago with Kansas State. Oklahoma State needs to pick up wins early in the season because I do think the back half of the schedule is more challenging than that first part. Again, notwithstanding Oregon coming to Stillwater, but this is going to be crucial that you've got your guy in Drew Mestemaker that's coming with Eric Morris. This will not all feel new to them, and I think Oklahoma State will benefit tremendously from that.
Drew Mestemaker is a real talent, and that may be enough for them to get things pointed in the right direction before they do really get tested in the back half of their Big 12 slate. The Big 12 is doubling down on these international games in 2026, and we will talk with the Chief Football and Competition Officer, Scott Draper, about what's ahead for the Big 12 when Inside the 12 returns. We welcome you back on Inside the 12. Mike Leslie Taylor McHargue. We'll take a break for a moment from revealing the schedule to talk to a man that was heavily involved in building the schedule. Big 12 Chief Football and Competition Officer Scott Draper joining us now. Scott, we appreciate the time. This schedule-making process, I'm sure, was rather intense for you and for many. What was this process like, building this beast over the course of the last several months? Really, it's a years-long process, I know, in some regards. What is this process like for you to put this schedule together?
Well, first of all, it's great to see you. Thanks for all the work that you guys do in revealing our schedule to our fans. It is a beast, and it is something that we do spend the entire year building. Mostly because there's nuances to every schedule and every year. Certainly this year, with the London game being played. So really, my job was then to work with our team and our partners to find the best dates for those games to be played. Nuance this year that's different than the last couple. There was only one bye in the season, so we had 13 weeks to play 12 games. So that added a different complexity to the process. And then we had some mid-season non-conference games. So again, it's always a challenge. It's always difficult to do, but something that we take great pride in. It is the most important responsibility that I have in the job that I have, and certainly look at all the nuances of college football as it's being played from the previous season, certainly with the transfer portal and the roster movement, trying to anticipate who's going to be good, who is making significant changes in their program, and how to balance that competitively throughout the schedule. Is much different than it was 4 or 5 years ago. So obviously looking forward to the 2026 season, starting with our game in Dublin with TCU.
Scott, you mentioned some of those marquee non-conference matchups, obviously led by BYU hosting Notre Dame, but also games like a Baylor and an Auburn, some of these other TCU and North Carolina, Oregon and Oklahoma State. How important is it for the health of the league, not just to schedule these games, but to win and play at a high level in these games?
Well, I think you're seeing it in the conversations around the postseason in the college football playoff. I think valuing complete schedules that against really good opponents, you're seeing that play out in how the teams are selected. And I suspect going forward, the emphasis on that will be even greater. So there is a tangible value to those teams that are fortunate enough to be in the college football playoff mix. But as a league, playing teams in the non-conference against other leagues helps us grow our league, certainly gives us opportunity for our fans to experience a different environment if we're on the road or having one of those teams come into our buildings. Lots of nuances to it. Every schedule season presents a different type of challenge, and certainly the non-conference games this year, having candidly a non-conference game in Week 7 is something new for us. But we're excited to have that game, and certainly excited for Notre Dame to visit BYU.
You mentioned in a moment ago the Week 3 game in London, an additional international game this year. Why was that important for you guys to add, and what does that signal about your desires for more perhaps in the future?
Well, Commissioner Yormark has been very open and honest about our desire to expand our conference globally and internationally. Certainly, we had a taste of that last year with the game in Dublin with Iowa State and Kansas State. Certainly this year, TCU playing in that same building against North Carolina. We'll start the season in a place that is fantastic. The fans are going to love it. The game will be a terrific game. And then, of course, the game we're a conference game in London at Wembley Stadium. I had a chance to go to London and visit Wembley during the season last year in October. Iconic building, and for us to have the first college football game in that building is something that says a lot about our fans, the profile of our conference, and certainly the two teams participating in Kansas and Arizona State. So it fits what we're doing. Expect us to continue to push the envelope there in the future. Expect us to continue to find ways to play internationally. That's something that we've been very open and honest about. And certainly for us, finding the right venues and the right iconic buildings is something that we look forward to. And then lastly, it does work hand in hand with our partnership with the NFL. Following our announcement this past season with the NFL on partnering on an international strategy, certainly they have a strong presence internationally, and we intend to work alongside them to continue to grow our international footprint as well.
Scott, there are a number of key rivalry matchups throughout the season, and would love to get your insight on how does it benefit the league as opposed to having these games all on rivalry weekend in the last week of the regular season. The Big 12 has spread these out, and there's a number of weeks that have rivalry games throughout the season. How does that benefit the league, and what is the thought process that goes into spreading these rivalry games out?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Thank you for the question. I think what our strategy around rivalry games is really this. There are some games that have been played forever and other than really Arizona State have occurred in multiple parts of the season, right? So the tradition of playing Thanksgiving weekend all rivalry games is not something that a lot of the games that have been that we call rivalries has occurred over a period of years. So there's some history and tradition that we want to continue to maintain. But from the value to the league and why those games are important, certainly they're important to the participating schools and their fan bases. But it's important that we showcase those games in the best windows and the best opportunities for the most people around the country to see them. And I look forward to not only the games that are traditional rivalry games, but the games that are starting to build because of the transition of members over the last few years.
Well, Scott, you guys did a terrific job with the schedule. We are already counting down the 7 some odd months that we've got to wait until we can get it back rolling again. Thank you so much for the time, and thank you for your work in making a day like this happen.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
All right, still to come, 4 more schedules to get to and some power brokers within the conference to talk about. Texas Tech looking to reload for another playoff run. And can Utah keep the momentum going with a new head coach at the helm? We roll right along here on Inside the 12, your 2026 schedule reveal. Mike Leslie, our 4-year starter at QB, Taylor McHargue, taking you through it. Let's get to TCU now. And Sonny Dykes in year number 5 with the Horned Frogs, 9-4 a year ago. In 2026, they start with a week 0 tilt in Dublin as they take on North Carolina. Those overseas trips always hard on the body, but they do at least have the bye week right afterward to recoup.
Such an important game, a game that you might actually see later on in this show from me. But for TCU, go back to the last year, Kansas State and Iowa State. The winner of that game, it sets you up for so much success and belief in your team as you move forward in the schedule. And then BYU, I'm not sure there's a more important game on the schedule than BYU at home. That is a game, if they could figure out a way to win both both of those. This is a team all of a sudden in TCU that you're talking about competing for this league. They bring in Jaden Craig at quarterback, set all sorts of records for Harvard. Be interesting to see, can he solidify that spot at quarterback? This was a team in TCU the last couple seasons. They've thrown the ball at a really high level, but running the football has continued to be a challenge for them. So for TCU to take that next step in this league, they've got to figure out a little more balance. But there are wins on the schedule. I actually think this sets up pretty favorably for the Horned Frogs.
New offensive coordinator for the Frogs as well that I know you like.
Yeah, Gordon Samus came from UConn, and that was an offense, had a chance to cover them a couple times last year. Incredibly efficient. They get the ball out of the hands of the quarterbacks quickly, and Gordon Samus is all about get the ball in your playmakers' hands. He will identify who that is early for the Horned Frogs. Does a great job of creating space and maximizing their talent. I love that hired offensive coordinator in Gordon Samus for TCU.
The defending champs in the Big 12, the Texas Tech Red Raiders, 12-2 a season ago, and looking to run it back in 2026. Let's get a look at what Joey McGuire's team will deal with in 2026. ACU, Oregon State, Sam Houston State, their 3 non-conference games. They open up the conference slate on September 19th against Houston.
I think Tech ended up with one of the more favorable draws in the schedule for 2026. When you look at the conference draw, where they're going on the road, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State, and Baylor late in the year. That Baylor game may ultimately end up being the most important game of the season for the Red Raiders. Obviously, Brendan Sorsby coming over from Cincinnati, I think is likely an upgrade at the quarterback spot. And for Texas Tech, it really is going to come down to what can they replace on that defensive line and that defensive front from a year ago that was so dynamic and so good for the Red Raiders. I think they'll reload. I think we should expect Texas Tech to be back and competing for the Big 12 again next season. And again, a huge piece that helps them. I think they got one of the more favorable draws in terms of conference play in the schedule next year in 2026.
Well, because they've got their hardest games, or certainly 3 of their hardest games, Houston, Arizona State, Arizona, all on their home field. That is a big boon for Joey McGuire's team.
There's no doubt. And having a guy that comes in and Brendan Sorsby that has a ton of experience. And Cincinnati, the challenges that they faced late in the year, Brendan Sorsby in a lot of ways I thought was having to be Superman for the Bearcats. And in the month of November, I think people started to figure out how to slow down Sorsby and that Cincinnati offense. He'll have more weapons around him in Lubbock. And I think having a veteran quarterback with a favorable schedule, it all sets up really nicely for Texas Tech. And I think those Texas Tech fans should have a lot of optimism that that wasn't just a one-hit wonder last season. They've got a chance, really a good chance to repeat as champions in 2026.
The whole world knew that Texas Tech got Brendan Sorsby because Cody Campbell got the billboard in Times Square to let everybody know about it. They're fired up to have that kid in Lubbock. We mentioned it earlier with the finish to Cincinnati season not going well, and he was obviously a part of that at the very least. What do you think the motivation is for Sorsby to show, hey, I'm the guy from the 7-1 stretch, not the 0-5 finish?
I think he's going to have plenty of motivation. You don't really need more motivation than getting to go to a place in Texas Tech where this was their number 1 guy. And they went after him in a big way, got him to get on campus in Lubbock and didn't let him leave. And now for Texas Tech, there's also motivation again in not letting last season in 2025 be a one-hit wonder, because they're trying to establish this is an every year kind of thing now. We want to consistently compete at this level, and having that level of quarterback, I think, is a big part of why you should expect Texas Tech to have a similar run next year that they did in 2025.
And oh, by the way, he goes to Cincinnati on October 24th to play his old team. That will be an awful lot of fun for everybody to take in. Defensively, they do bring in a bunch of transfers that should be helpful. A 5-star freshman edge rusher coming in LaDamian Guyton, so they're restocking the shelves on that side of the ball as well. Let's get to Utah, one of the primary contenders for Texas Tech in 2026. Went 11-2 a year ago, but a new head coach in Morgan Scalley. Let's see what the Utah Utes will be dealing with in 2026. Idaho, Arkansas, and Utah State, their non-conference games. They start on the road in Big 12 play with Iowa State on September 26th.
This is another team that, when you look at the schedule, I think the first part of the season is more beneficial to them than the challenging portion of the back half of the schedule. At Arizona and at TCU in November, obviously that's the hardest stretch on the calendar. But for Utah, just one road game until you get to October 17th. It's also massive. They get Dampier back and Bird Ficklin, who, oh, by the way, when Devin Dampier was injured, Bird Ficklin came in, ended up being Big 12 Offensive Player of the Week the week that he started. So for Utah, I think we'll expect to see a very similar style approach that they had really the entire time you saw Kyle Whittingham as their head coach. Play good defense, run the football well, and having both of their key pieces at the quarterback spot is going to be massive for Utah. And like we just mentioned with Texas Tech, I think for this league, two of the favorites in Tech and Utah got two of the more favorable draws in terms of conference play this season.
Morgan Scalley was their defensive coordinator, been the head coach in waiting for about a decade now. So this is very much just kind of a passing of the torch. This is a continuation of the old guard for the Utah Utes, and nothing really should change for this team.
I think it is huge that Morgan Scalley was already within the program and had been there for coming up on 20 years in total, because the identity for Utah won't change. And going back to, again, the style, play good defense, ball control, don't turn the football over on offense, and run the football well. It's the reason it's so challenging to go to Utah and try to get out of there with a win. It's the same thing that I think they'll continue to carry that identity into this 2026 season. And I go back to in this modern college football era where you have pieces move around constantly, and if you lose your quarterback, it's so challenging to replace them. The fact that they got two key pieces, not just one, and Dampier and Bird Ficklin both coming back, that's massive for Utah.
November 7th at home for Utah against BYU. When Morgan Scalley tried to address the crowd at a college basketball game in the last couple of weeks to kind of reintroduce himself to the fans, the BYU fans drowned him out. A little extra motivation for Morgan Scalley to send those BYU fans home unhappy come early November. Last team on the docket, the West Virginia Mountaineers, year number 2 for Rich Rodriguez. What will he have to deal with in 2026? Let's get a look at the schedule for the Mountaineers. Coastal Carolina, UT Martin, and at Virginia, an interesting non-conference game that'll be played in Charlotte on September 19th. Gets things rolling before they host Oklahoma State.
Expect West Virginia to take a step forward. I think they're very similar to what we talked about with Central Florida earlier in the show. Struggles on the road. They were 1-5 on the road a year ago. That's the piece that has to improve next season. And I think they've got some challenging road games when you look at the schedule. At Virginia, obviously, at TCU, at Tech, and at Utah. So for West Virginia, it's going to be about maximizing those home games, figure out a way to pick off 1 or 2 on the road, and then who's your quarterback going to be? Scotty Fox coming back. What is that going to look like? Who's going to ultimately be the guy for Rich Rodriguez? I think we all expect West Virginia to take a step forward, but again, this is another team that they had so much youth a year ago. They've got to figure out a way to take that step and win league games on the road, because as everybody knows, it's not just getting to bowl eligibility, but competing in this league, you have to be balanced home and away.
I think they expect it to be a true battle at quarterback. Certainly the fans, I think, expect Mike Hawkins Jr., the transfer in, and Scotty Fox, who was fun last year to watch play the quarterback position. Those two, I think, are going to have an interesting battle all through the offseason for that quarterback 1 position for West Virginia.
Remember, all these games lead to the 2026 Big 12 Football Championship, making the move this year to Friday, December 4th. Prime time from AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas. More to come on Inside the 12's look at the 2026 Big 12 football schedule when we come back.
Back on Inside the 12, Mike Leslie Taylor McHargue. We have showed you all 16 teams, 12-game schedules. It's all laid out there for you. I'm sure you have your games that you are looking forward to most. We'll give you the top 5 games we are looking forward to most, and we'll toss it to you first to kick us off.
All of these for my 5 tried to pick what games do I think for one team or the other is the defining game of their season. We'll start with Houston at Texas Tech. I think this is one of my dark horse teams in the league. Can Houston go on the road and get a win in Lubbock? Massive game for the Cougars. Notre Dame at BYU. I think this is the most important non-conference game for the Big 12 this season. Getting a chance to play in Provo against the Fighting Irish. Marquee matchup. Everybody will have eyes on this game. Texas Tech going to Baylor. I have this one on there for Baylor, bringing back Dave Aranda. I think this is going to be a big opportunity for Baylor. If they're still in the mix late in the season, can they get a win and play upset against the Red Raiders? TCU going all the way to Dublin to play Bill Belichick and the Tar Heels of North Carolina. You'll have in week 0 all the eyes of the sport on the Horned Frogs. Big opportunity for them to get some momentum in week 0 that should carry them through the month of September and into conference play if they can get a win in Dublin. And then lastly, BYU and Utah. You could probably pick this almost every season as the most important game in this league, but this was a year ago when BYU won against Utah in Provo. That ended up being one of the most important games of their season. I think for two teams that I think we expect to be at the top of the league again in the Big 12 next year, likely championship implications, and that's why I have BYU-Utah as my most important game next season.
Love that game. Really looking forward to that game. I love that we don't have a whole lot of carryover. There's only one game that both of us have on our list, which is very cool. My list, I start at number 5 with Oklahoma State. A little bit of a surprise probably off the board, but I think with the new head coach, the new quarterback, Drew Mestamaker, and Eric Morris, I think they might be 4-1 possibly coming into that game. Good litmus test for the Pokes and see if they're for real at that point of the season. BYU Notre Dame, the one game that we both have on the list, I think that game is massive for the conference. If BYU wins that game, that lifts all boats within the Big 12. Utah Houston on October 24th. Two teams I think will both be in the top 5 in the conference this fall, head to head when the season really starts to ramp up. And then I've got Arizona involved in each of my 2 biggest games in the conference because I really believe in Noah Fifita and what he's got pointed in the right direction for that Wildcats program. I think their game week 9 against Texas Tech is the biggest game on Tech's schedule, the toughest test on Tech's schedule, even though so many of their tough tests are on their home field. Can Noah Fifita go into Lubbock and get a win, upset the Red Raiders that expect to be either preseason 1 or 2 probably in the conference? That one will be a fun test. And then BYU, Arizona, I think as I look at it right now in January, those are probably my number 2 and number 3 teams in the conference. That could be a game, even though it comes very early on, September 12th, that could be a game that ends up deciding which one of those 2 teams goes to Arlington.
I love it. Arizona, BYU, Utah, Texas Tech. You can see a number of those teams represented in what will likely be, if those are the favorites, some of the most important games next season in 2026.
192 games laid out for you over the course of the last hour. It all leads to game number 193 in Arlington, the Big 12 championship game. Who will be there come early December? We cannot wait to get the Big 12 season started come August 29th. For Taylor McHargue and our entire Inside the 12 crew, I'm Mike Leslie. We will see you this fall for the 2026 Big 12 football season.